Okay, we're all set.
Thank you, Dave. Good morning. Good morning. This is a convening of the Massachusetts Gaming Commission for the purposes of conducting a roundtable. Public meeting number 517. I am Jordan Maynard, and I am serving as the interim chair of the Massachusetts Gaming Commission. This meeting is being held virtually, so we will do a roll call. Good morning, Commissioner O'Brien.
Good morning, I'm here.
Good morning, Commissioner Hill.
Good morning, I'm here.
And good morning, Commissioner Skinner.
Good morning.
It's approximately 11:03 on May 21st, 2024. And this is a roundtable that will focus primarily on the how, when, and why a patron would be limited by a licensed sports wagering operator in the Commonwealth. This meeting came about because the MGC was made aware of reports from consumers and various articles in the media that some operators limit bettors who routinely win. Some claim they were not in violation of house rules, state laws or regulations, or other authorized acts when they were limited. It was the understanding of the MGC team that operators have the right to limit their risk by blocking those attempting to circumvent the rules. If a player is violating rules, laws, or regulations, they should not be welcome to access a market. That said, many at the MGC, myself included, were wondering if there were patrons who were wagering honestly, who were being limited. Stamping out the illegal market was a key goal to 23N, and the commission worked tirelessly to stand up sports wagering in the Commonwealth, in part to ensure that the citizens of the Commonwealth had the opportunity to place a wager in a safe and regulated market. There is a worry that if we have operators limiting patrons who are playing by the rules, that limitation will naturally incentivize those players to turn to the illegal market. The purpose in convening this roundtable is to learn the perspectives of the operators, the patrons, and those in the research and responsible gaming communities, and to start a dialogue. I hope that we can do that today. We will not be proposing a new regulation or making policy today. Now, I've been made aware that 10 active operators in the Commonwealth, after initially signaling that they would attend and actively participate in this public roundtable, decided not to. It is my understanding that they were requesting an executive session to discuss these matters, as they felt that some information would be too sensitive to reveal in public. I will turn to Councilor Grossman and the legal team to address this issue later, but I want to clear the air here. We are required by law to do our job in an open forum in Massachusetts. At times, it can be uncomfortable to have these conversations in public, and we understand it. My fellow commissioners and I are faced with this situation at almost every meeting, without the benefit of being able to collaborate before we join a meeting. It's tough, but that said, transparency is key to integrity of the industry in Massachusetts. This commission will never compromise transparency or integrity. Each of these operators corresponded with our team over the last 72 hours. We will be adding these correspondences to the public packet on our website. We appreciate the outreach and the comments from the operators and hope to continue engaging with them on this subject. With that said, I'm excited that we have experts in the field who have agreed to share their perspectives today. We want to organize this conversation today around 5 core questions that were shared with all the invitees. We will address each of them as we move forward, These were developed by the MGC team as conversation starters, but were in no way meant to limit the conversation. Myself and my fellow commissioners have the right to ask any question of any participant at any time during this process. To keep today's conversation on track, please use the hand raise feature or get my attention and be recognized before you share your thoughts. The aim is a respectful conversation where everyone learns from one another. As promised, I would now like to call for Councilor Grossman to briefly address the issue around the executive session. Councilor Grossman.
Well, thank you and good morning to you and to the entire commission, all who've joined us here today. I'll start with just kind of the short version, which is that we have reviewed this matter. There is no clear and safe way to enter into executive session in these circumstances to discuss this particular information. Specifically, there's no provision of the executive session law that covers the facts and circumstances of this matter. And there is really no provision of the public records law that could be made use of to enter into executive session comfortably here so that we could in any way guarantee the security of the information that's being provided to us. That's the high level overview of the executive session provision. I can obviously get into a lot more detail if that's of interest as to what the law says and how it is that we came to that conclusion. There has been some suggestion that there is a provision of the public records law that could be made use of here. It is my and our conclusion that that does not squarely fit into these circumstances, and we would not recommend that it be made use of here. We certainly have done that in the past under different circumstances, but those are not present here today. So it would be our recommendation that we not do that, and this particular conversation is best suited for public for the reasons you've already described, Mr. Chair. So with that, I'll just pause there. I'm happy, of course, to get into more detail if that would be helpful, but that's the high-level overview of our legal position on that point.
Thank you, Councilor Grossman. I will state so the public knows, and they do know, we are not shy about entering executive session when the law calls for it. Commissioners, do we have any questions for Councilor Grossman? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Councilor. I will add also that Bally's is here and represented by Justin Black here today. And so we appreciate Bally's willingness to engage on this topic. All right, with that, let's begin. Oh, commissioners, do we have anything to add to what I said beyond Councilor Grossman's comments? Okay, seeing none, let's begin. We're going to kick it to Director Bruce Band, Manager Boschman, and Manager Stefan.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Commissioner
it would
Skinner.
be helpful to understand who is participating in this roundtable aside from the representative Justin Black from Bally's.
Yes, and we do have, I can do this now. We were going to do it as, I think, as the team move forward, but we do have Jack Andrews, who's the co-founder of Unabated Sports. I'll mention that too. Rufus Peabody from Unabated Sports represented the perspective of a patron at a GLI roundtable that many of the commissioners and staff attended last month. He agreed to represent the perspective of a bettor here today. Keep in mind, we've got many emails from bettors, but unfortunately wasn't able to do so. As such, Jack agreed to sub in, and we're grateful for that. We have Brianne Dorschel from Dorschel Consulting, Dustin Goker, and if I'm saying your name wrong, I apologize, who's a gaming industry consultant. We have our own director, Mark Vanderlinden, who's also going to be part of the conversation. I'm trying to see if I'm missing anyone else on the screen. All right, so does that answer your question, Commissioner Skinner? All right, Got it. So we will kick it now over to Director Van.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Over the last several actually months, Andrew Steffen, the operations manager, and I, as well as Crystal Boschman, have had conversations with the licensees about this subject. And at this time, I think I would like to have Andrew kind of discuss these conversations and explain them to you. Andrew?
Yeah, thanks, Bruce. Good morning, commissioners, and to all listening to our roundtable today. Just like to give a quick overview or recap of what our sports wagering division has done in recent months to get us to where we are today. This roundtable on wager limitations, as Chair Maynard said, this originally stems from a public comment made to our commissioners last July, about 6 months after our initial launch of sports wagering. The comment in general discussed the business practice of sports wagering operators limiting a sports wager, whereas a patron would not be able to limit the maximum amount for a particular event or sport. There was an expressed interest in this topic. However, we kept this matter under review for several months as we continue to launch and build out our sports wagering team. It wasn't until this past January where we were able to really dive into this topic thoroughly. We began conducting general research of our own online, looking at published articles and media outlets. We looked at our state regulations on this topic and compared them to other jurisdictions as well. We looked at the Operator's House rules, their terms and conditions, and their related approved internal controls. In March, we met with 3 of our operators individually to gain more knowledge and insight into this practice, which was very beneficial to our division. We eventually presented our findings at the March 28th public meeting, discussing our regulations around the topic, as well as briefly highlighting the Operator's House rules too. During that March 28th meeting, it was mentioned that a roundtable would be the best setting for further discussion. And after that public meeting, we looped in our legal division and spent the next 4 to 6 weeks meeting with our remaining operators and continuing to follow up with the operators we had met with previously, scheduling secondary or follow-up meetings as well. Throughout this all, we gained highly valuable information from all of our licensees, all of whom provided many details, helping us shape the questions and the format of our roundtable today. And just to touch on the attachments in your packet, starting on page 3, there is the initial unchanged memo, which assisted in our presentation on March 28th. This is the one that highlights our regulations and the House rules. And then beginning on page 7 is a packet of comments received from the general public. These comments were all submitted just prior to or shortly after our March 28th public meeting, where this was first discussed. Throughout our meetings with the operators, we did ask many questions on what Chair Maynard originally said, how, why, and when a sports wagering patron is limited. Many of the operators gave similar responses, however different. They were all valuable information. And I can kick it back over to Interim Chair Maynard if he has any additional comments, or Director Bruce Ban to get this thing started.
Commissioners, do we have any questions for Andrew or Bruce? Okay, I am seeing none. That brings us to C, topic C under item number 2, which is the questions. And so we will go ahead. I'll just kick it off with the first question. And I think by nature, it probably is going to you, Mr. Black. One of the questions we thought about, as the team did, was to detail how and why a patron may be limited on a platform, including how you may limit patrons on an individual basis.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning, everybody. Obviously, I'll state for the record too, Bally's Interactive is not currently active in the state of Massachusetts, although we do appreciate the opportunity to come on today and discuss some of these questions to the best of my ability. I'll preface my comments with saying I'm very likely not the subject matter expert here, but I've provided some context that I hope will be of value to everyone here today. So based on that, I mean, we'll just start with saying that obviously sportsbooks offer to, aim to offer a large, broad range of possibilities and wagering activities, with thousands of events being offered each month. And within these events, millions of odds changes are made every month. With Canby estimating, they make approximately 650 odd changes per month. Specific to limiting of patrons, I can only speak from Bally's perspective and how we operate in other jurisdictions, but we don't limit players based just on winnings, but rather it's based on underlying factors that are proprietary to Bally's Interactive, right, from a risk perspective.
Thank you, Justin. So, commissioners, do we have any follow-up questions to that question? And then we'll open it up to the floor to anyone that may have a comment on that. Mr. Andrews.
Hi, yes, sorry. Honored to be here with you all, commissioners. Thank you. My response to that would be that Bally's utilizes Canby, which is a third party that operates all of their risk management. So Mr. Black's statement that they do not themselves limit bettors based on winning is true. However, my question back to Mr. Black is, would Canby say the same? Because Canby has a history of identifying players based on their closing line value or their expected value and adjusting them, stake factoring them is what they call it, and then telling Bally's, okay, these are the players that we've limited down. So my question back to you, Mr. Black, is would Canby say the same thing that you said?
Mr. Andrews, let's try to always, and this is just a reminder, direct the questions through the chair, right? Not to one another.
Apologies.
Let's try to keep this as civil as possible. So, Mr. Black, if you are prepared to respond to that, feel free to do so.
Obviously, I can't speak on behalf of Canby and what they would say. I mean, all I can say is, unlike other gaming verticals, sports wagering odds are subject to a huge number of variables. Rosters changes, tactics, momentum, weather, and so odds aren't always perfect, right? And so sportsbooks have to operate under that assumption, and some patrons actively look to make an edge, right, out of those imperfections. I can't speak directly for what Canby would advise us, but I mean, that just hopefully adds a little context to, some of the variables and some of the challenges with sports wagering, right? And how, those odds are set.
That does make me think, does this conversation, should it be also broadened to vendors as we move forward and as we're thinking about moving forward? Mr. Andrews, that was a good prompt. Perhaps that would have been a good invitation to extend. Commissioners, any other questions on that line? Commissioner O'Brien.
So I have a question not on that line, but sort of backing up a little bit to the intro for Bruce and Andrew, which is more Bruce, I guess, based on your experience in the brick and mortar, Bruce. Talk to me and us if there's any history of brick and mortars in terms of wager limitation in that setting as opposed to sports betting.
Right. They do limit players that are considered advantage players in the casino as to how much they wager, but they limit every table. If you look at the tables, there's a minimum and maximum wager on every table.
So can you define advantage player in that setting?
That would be what the industry calls card counters and stuff, that they would limit those kind of players in the industry.
Okay. And is that considered, it's not considered illegal to card count, is that right?
Not in this jurisdiction, no.
Okay. In some jurisdictions?
They treat them in some jurisdictions that way, but we brought the rules that New Jersey uses here, and they have rules in the blackjack rules, for instance, to combat card counting, and it's not illegal in this jurisdiction. No.
Okay. All right. Thanks for the background.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Brien. And I see that Dustin has his hand up. I will ask one question. It's one of the few privileges the chair has to Director Band, and that is can you explain a little bit about the communication process when when a player is banned at one of those tables?
At the table itself, and like I say, they can't ban them here in this jurisdiction because it's not illegal, but they can limit like how much a player wagers, and it's at every table. There's a minimum maximum wager on every table, so they go kind of look at the risk that a player can come. I think most casinos probably limit a patron's wager to no more than 200,000 a hand, and that's usually if they bet that amount on every hand. At least my experience from what I've seen. So there is a limit to everybody's wager in a casino.
Thank you. But they would make them aware, right? They would walk up to the patron.
It's usually an agreement made with the player and so on.
Got it. Andrew, I see that your mic's off before I go to Commissioner Skinner.
Yeah, that's okay. I was just going to touch on what Bruce said. They made additional points they may make is that they'll split a deck in half on an advantage player, or they'll limit the number of hands he may play. So if an advantage player is counting cards and they say that they're going to wager more, they're going to play more hands, they may know that they're a card counter and they'll limit the number of hands that they're going to play, or they'll cut the shoe in half. That's all.
Got it. Thank you. And Dustin, we will get to you. Commissioner Skinner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I could just help set the stage a little bit here, at least from my perspective. We started, as Andrew indicated, talking about this subject in July of 2023 in response to wasn't a complaint, but it was certainly a comment, I think, in response to the regulations that we were promulgating at the time. And it was my understanding that the issues and concerns that were raised were limited to situations where sharps were involved. Since then, we've gotten some additional comment, as was also indicated by Andrew, indicating that this goes beyond just those professional sharps or individuals who are wagering on sports for a living, trying to make a profit. The comments overwhelmingly indicated that regular patrons, individuals who casually or recreationally wager, are being limited simply for winning, right? Winning in the ordinary course. And to me, that's a much different conversation. It affects many more individuals, many more citizens of this Commonwealth than the handful, I don't know how many, forgive me, of sharps that might be sort of gaming the system from the operator's perspective. So that then, to me, raises questions of integrity. It raises questions of fairness. And Mr. Chairman, you raised this issue as lack of communication to the patron as to what exactly is happening, what conduct on their part is likely to get them limited. And I understand and respect that, according to the memo that was prepared by our sports wagering division, it is completely within the commission's regulations. It's authorized for sports wagering operators to limit patrons, even on an individual basis. But what is not so clear is information that speaks to the necessary or appropriate language in that regulation 247.08. We just don't, as a commission, have enough information as to what goes into the necessary or appropriate determination by a sports wagering operator. And I understand we are not likely to get any meaningful responses to that question today. We don't have a large number of our operators, or actually any operators who are currently participating in this roundtable today. But And so that's a significant disadvantage where that's the question that I'm hoping to get answered. There's been a lot of complaints about individuals not having any information, not having any communication from the sports wagering operators, individuals who were courted by the sports wagering operators' VIP programs and suddenly shut down when they started to win. And that's concerning to me. Without having any more information about the reasons why, it's concerning to me that an individual can bet thousands of dollars, as was the case in some of these firsthand accounts. But when they start to win, they get sort of shut off, limited. And I want to understand why. I get that a lot of the sports wagering operators are tying that rationale to their risk management, and that's fine. But it has to be more than just this sort of trust us approach that it seems that the sports wagering operators have the approach that they've been taking, at least when they set forth in their house rules that they reserve the right to limit individual patrons. So I'm just looking for a lot more than what we have in front of us in order for us to really assess and analyze this issue.
Commissioner Skinner, I'll take a stab at that. I appreciate everything you just said. I will say that we have a group of experts here that are willing to share at least their perspective. We got to learn from one another, right? And today we got to learn from who's here. And what you said actually prompted a question. And I will kick it over to Dustin. He's been very patient, and maybe work this into the question on whatever his comment is. But, one of the things I think we wanted to learn was what's the experience of a patron once they're limited, and what communication comes along with that. So Commissioner Skinner, I agree with the sentiment. Are you okay if I pose that question to Dustin? All right, Dustin, we're going to go to you, and please introduce yourself. I feel like I did not do a good enough job. For anybody that I introduced, I did it on the fly. Please tell us who you are, where you're from, and why you're here today. So.
Sure. My name is Dustin Gauker. I currently have my own consultancy called Closing Line Consulting. I have been in the sports betting, fantasy sports space for going on 10 years now. I covered some of the original daily fantasy sports regulation that came through the AG's office there when I worked for Legal Sports Report, which is probably hopefully a lot of you know, is one of the industry sites that covers all of this. So now, to be clear, I don't represent a sports book. I'm not representing anybody here. I'm probably, hopefully, a middle ground between a bettor and an operator in terms of wanting, like all of you, I think, on the commission, to get to a good answer of what should be done, if anything, should be done about this. And I think go back to what Commissioner Skinner said. It's definitely, I think data is important. I think a lot of us in the industry would advocate for just knowing more about what happens, because right now it's kind of the boogeyman. It's like, we know people are limited. We don't know always why or how. Even the people who are limited, I don't think are made privy to that. Sometimes they just get an email saying, our trading operation has limited you. You're not going to be able to either place bets or you're going to have certain limits. I come at it trying to think about how you can get the answers you want, and that the operators can also maybe provide you with some data. Because as we sit here, obviously operators have data about how much they're limiting people and why and all of that. And maybe a great starting point would be, how many people, what percentage of perhaps Massachusetts patrons who bet at your sports books who operate in the state, what percentage of them are limited for winning opportunities because of violating house rules, or for responsible gaming? That feels like a very broad number that all of the operators should be able to provide you, if not publicly, privately. And that would be a great starting point. Because right now it is I think it's just the boogeyman. It's like lots of people are limited. Okay, I see stories of it on social media, like people saying, "Oh, I've been limited. I can only bet $5 on X market," or "I've been banned from the book." But they don't maybe don't know why, and maybe we don't know why they were limited. And I think that's the missing data in trying to make any kind of determination on what should happen moving forward is transparency. Like, again, that top level transparency. Is this actually a problem? I'm not sure if it is, like on a macro scale. Like, yes, there's 100% people, the other people on this call can attest to that. There are 100% people being limited for winning. How many of those are there and all of that? And I think we'll get this to the later questions, but I think if you just go there's I think there's some gray area between limiting everybody you want and not limiting anyone at all, or having some kind of middle ground. And I'll save that for later. But I think right now, like as I try to thread the needle for what you guys want, it's finding data, like real data about what is happening in the market. And I don't think that's out there other than within the operators privately when they're doing business.
I appreciate that, Dustin. And I think to that point, I think the operators, and you'll see this in the packet as it's being updated, some of them are making that point that they would give that number in a more private setting. I think they're trying to make that point. That said, this is a fact-finding mission on just understanding, right? And even you just laid out the issue and where we can go next in a very succinct and appropriate manner, I think. I see Brienne has her hand up, and I always look forward to hearing what she has to say. Hello.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for having me. No pressure to come out with something after that comment. For those that may not know me, my name is Brienne Dorschwall. I run my own consulting group similar to Dustin. My specialty is in problem and responsible gambling policy. I wanted to echo Dustin's comments about needing more data points about the percentage of patrons within the Commonwealth that are being limited. I did want to point out, though, for the group, though there is a very interesting test case that was rather high profile in Washington, D.C., where a player was limited, though reasoning was given a problem or responsible gambling concern, but in fact, it actually had to do with his winning. So I would like to just offer up a word of caution that we have seen instances in other jurisdictions where responsible or problem gambling is the rationale for why someone's being limited. And having that very clear distinction about a case being a true problem or responsible gambling issue versus a justification that actually may not be authentic or truthful for that rationale, I believe is very important here. I look forward to offering up some commentary about how there's probably not enough limiting being done right now across the board as it relates to problem and responsible gambling. But I'd also like to offer a caution that it can be just as detrimental to the wider public to use that as a reasoning if it is not truly an issue with problematic play.
So Brienne, you just gave a perfect example of why this roundtable is happening, right? Because that's a really good point. Where could limiting actually be beneficial to a patron, but can we make sure that there's some lines and distinctions around what's beneficial versus what's not beneficial? We don't want to drive people that don't have problem gambling issues into the illegal market, right? Commissioners, anything to add before I'm going to then probably ask Jack to explain the experience of a patron once they've been limited, if he wouldn't mind doing so. Commissioner O'Brien, I see you leaning in.
So the question that I have, and whether it's for Dustin or Brienne, Mark, anybody on here, if you can answer, which is, I often am directed to Europe when I ask about questions, particularly on RG limitations, that sort of thing. Are there any regs, statutes, rules, practices in that market that we should learn about in this conversation?
Go ahead, Brienne.
Thank you. Great question. So actually, when I was doing homework related to this roundtable and trying to empower myself with a lot of research and evidence around this. So actually, Australia is an interesting jurisdiction, not necessarily around responsible problem gambling, but consumer protections. It only deals with racing, but there are minimum bet standards that were arrived at because of concerns of patrons being limited. Also, we are now starting to see in the UK more robust policy discussions around limiting VIP algorithms to track problematic play that would have interventions. And then, of course, you have the New Jersey model, which goes just a little bit shy of limiting a patron, but does have very distinctive obligations for a licensee when certain thresholds for play are met to talk to someone. They go just a little bit short of mandating a limit for problem gambling reasons.
And I'll just add, at least in the United States, it's a pretty novel discussion. It was not been thought about in legislation or regulation to any great degree that I know of across the United States right now. Again, I think you've gotten so much response because it is novel, because you are taking the first steps to looking at the issue, and whether anything was done or not. I think it's a good discussion to have at this point in the life cycle. A lot of laws were put out there as consumer protection, and it's not necessarily clear that's always being the case on this. And like Brianne said, I think there's often more of a max bet on the ceiling of a bet rather than a minimum bet. It was as a consideration as terms of either laws or regulations across anywhere in the regulated ecosystem. So I think it's good that you're even having the discussion again. That like you got so many people talking to you probably outside of Massachusetts, even because it's the first time that these people who are being limited feel like they were being heard.
Thank you.
Follow up. Thank you.
No, not right now.
Well, thank you, Dustin. And what we do here is not to necessarily attract attention, right? It's to actually do the work and figure it out, right? Which is what we try to do. With that said, Jack, I gave you time to think, right? Tell us a little bit about what happens to a patron when they're limited from your experience or what you know about.
Sure. So just as a background, my name is Jack Andrews. I am a professional bettor. I've been a professional gambler for over 20 years. It's how I derive the majority of my income. So for most bettors that get limited, there's actually no notification. They just submit a bet and the sportsbook says, no, that's more than we'll allow, try again. And oftentimes they have to try again and again and again until they find what their limit is. It's not posted. The comment was made earlier that in a casino, you have a minimum and a maximum that are listed on every table. However, for sports betting, for all the operators that are currently in Massachusetts, there are no listed limits on any of your platforms. A player does not know what the max bet is until they enter it and it's kicked back and said, no, that's too much. And for a lot of players, the limits are punitive. Limited down to $1.38 or $4. And this is not just on esoteric prop bets that may be way outside the norm, but this is on NFL sides and totals where any sports book can afford to book anyone on an efficient market like that. If you want to kind of learn more about this, and this is not a personal plug, but I have a YouTube channel where I explain a lot of these concepts. You can search for Unabated, which is our company, and you'll see there's a video titled "Winners Not Welcome," and it goes through my personal experience when New Jersey first allowed online betting, and I was limited after about 3 weeks. And I was limited. I wasn't even winning. I was actually down $600. I later talked to the traders at DraftKings who were the ones that limited me. And they said, oh, we limited you because we saw you were betting second inning lines in baseball. And we knew anyone betting second inning lines must know what they're doing. So we didn't want your action anymore.
Commissioners, follow up to Mr. Andrews.
Not necessarily a follow-up, Mr. Chairman, but I do have a question. I'm not sure who is best able to answer this, perhaps Mr. Black from Bally's. Could you speak to, or anyone really, could you speak to this concept of new player account limitations, how is it determined by a sports wagering operator what limit to give to a new patron, someone who is just opening up an account? And I asked that question because a lot of what we heard in the comments was this notion that when a winning patron is limited, their limit is a percentage of what a new player's limit is. And I'm just trying to follow that. Does that make sense to you, Mr. Black?
Yeah, I can't speak myself specifically to that, but I do know obviously that, like with anything, right, based on play, right, and multiple factors that play into that, down the line. But from an out of the box new account sign up, every player is treated exactly the same and isn't capped based on their first winnings, on the platform.
So from your perspective, that's not a real thing, right? So there's not this individual limit setting upon account creation from your perspective.
There will be a threshold, but it won't be prohibitive in the manner that you described it earlier, or that Jack described, right, where they'll be limited to $1.50 bet. I can't speak to the specifics of what that risk tolerance and level would be, but there obviously is some parameters based on all sports wagering, but just for the sheer factor of someone winning wouldn't necessarily then limit them from making subsequent wagers, in my experience.
So what would the parameters be for a new account in determining a wager limit?
I don't have that information with me, but would be happy to follow up the best I can post-meeting with the MGC.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Skinner, and thank you, Mr. Black. And would also say that if there were a bevy of operators here, perhaps we would have a bevy of different answers to that question. So that, Commissioners, any questions up to this point? Additional questions before we continue down the prompts? All right. So I'm going to kick this over back to Brianne, and Mark and Dustin and Jack, for that matter, can weigh in. The responsible gaming implications. We already started talking a little bit about it. If a patron limits are heavily regulated, right? If, let's say, we do regulate patron limits, we just heard about minimums and maximums on tables, for example. What's the RG implications of that?
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity. I believe that we're talking about two different things, perhaps. I think stake limits are very different than looking at aggregate data if harm is potentially happening to a player that we would define as being a responsible or problem gambling concern. There's some competing research internationally. One out of Canada suggests about 1% of an individual's total income would be kind of the safe zone for gambling expenditures. Another suggests about 3% of discretionary income. What I offer up by saying this is that there is no magic number that I could ever offer up that is the indicator that harm is happening. One of us on this call could expend $1,000 a month and still be totally fine, and another 100, and it causes catastrophic harm. It is subjective. But we do know that books are very unique in that they have at their disposal billions of data points, right? And we know that problem gambling is behavioral. It is not just financial. So the question really begs, how much of that aggregate data is being analyzed to understand the risk that someone is facing when it comes to gambling related harm? So Some facts that I don't love that just recently came out from your neighboring state of Connecticut. 71% of revenue is being arrived at by 7% of the population. 1.8% of the having a problem gambling diagnosis, and 4.9% being at risk. And for the record, this is not an at risk of winning population. This is an at risk of developing a problem. So it really begs to question, to Dustin's earlier point, how many people are being limited for problem gambling concerns, and are they true? Because data in other markets suggest that they are not being limited at the same rates maybe winners are, because they are heavily relied upon to build the revenue of the business. So using standardized metrics, indicators that are derived at both financial and behavioral, to do a better job at universally tracking and then communicating and intervening with players that might be experiencing harm or at risk would seem to be something I believe worth exploring for this commission, and frankly, all jurisdictions that are looking to use the data to prevent gambling related harms.
Commissioners, any follow-up to that before I turn it over to Director Van der Linden? Commissioner O'Brien?
Whether it's on that point specifically or just something that I was thinking of, given the whole conversation we've had today, which is, to your point, Brianne, right? They have a lot of data, and also to your point, Jack, right? There's no min-mans. There's no, I say min-man. There's no minimums. There's no, sorry, my prosecutor day is coming back. There's no minimums. There's no maximum bets, right? That are being put on these. Do you know of any regulations out there where they tie the maximum bet to the minimum? You know, take someone out, forgetting someone who was banned for either RG reasons or other reasons, nefarious play, something like that. If you have a minimum percentage, is there or amount, is there any been a set that if you're going to do that proportionately, you can only go allow so high on a bet?
The only jurisdiction I can think of where that's the case, and again, it is not an RG, was what I found out of Australia as it relates to fixed odds betting. There was a whole set of standards and algorithms of minimum percentage tied to maximum.
Okay. Is there any way you could provide that?
I would be happy.
Or whatever to sports wagering?
I would be more than happy to.
That would be great. Thank you.
We love learning from other jurisdictions, even those not within our borders. Director Van der Linden, do you have something to add?
Yeah, Brianne always says it much better than I can. There's a couple pieces there. You know, we endorse the lower risk gambling guidelines, which is a mix of behavioral and financial. It would say 1% of an individual's monthly income. It would be no more than 1%. It would be no more than 2 forms of gambling in a given month, and no more than four days per month. And so those are the guidelines that we follow or we endorse, and it does assign a specific percentage to that. And Brianne also cited Connecticut research about the percentage of expenditures in the industry from at-risk and problem gamblers. And in Massachusetts, it's not dissimilar to that. In our latest general population survey by UMass Amherst, Dr. Rachel Bolbert, it was somewhere around 88% from 10% of problem and at-risk gamblers. I would like to say data, as Dustin and Brianne both highlighted, is essential, and it's not looking at an individual bet. It's not looking at a very brief snapshot, but it's this, as Brianne pointed out, it's aggregate data, and where I think that it is being utilized in order to limit bettors who are winning. I think it's not dissimilar to the type of data and technology that exists to balance it on the other side of that score sheet as well. And I know that the commission is very interested in this, and we're pursuing this to as much as we possibly can to determine that. But I think it really is like, it comes down to the data that we know exists from all of our operators and identifying how this can be used to protect players, and so, and Brianne's example, I think, I can't remember, was it Virginia? I hadn't heard of that. I would like to express some, share that concern that you don't want a limitation to happen under the guise of responsible gaming when that is not the case. And so I think that's something the commission should weigh carefully.
Director Van der Linden, it's part of Virginia and part of Maryland, which they turned into DC some few hundred years ago. So I think she's going to bring that to us. So you're technically correct. Let's see, who else do we have? Do we have any comments or follow-ups to that particular line of thought before we move on? Oh, Dustin.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just add, I think, like, echo what Brianne said again, is that it's two separate issues for sure, but not totally dissociated. I do think, again, there's a spectrum. Operators are not doing nothing. Are operators doing enough on responsible gambling and limiting? It's hard to say that either. I don't think they're not doing absolutely every last thing they can. Those numbers that Brianne said, clearly point to the fact that there are some amount of problem gamblers who are providing meaningful amounts of revenue. Is that something that can be regulated to any great degree? I'm not sure. I think the core issue here about player limits and customer protection is probably more germane, at least from my perspective. I mean, I'm not going to tell you, obviously it's up to you what you want to focus on, but I think that it is like Brianne said, it's so hard to get into like what is a problem gambling for one person. It's like every person is a snowflake from that regard. Like is it harmful to them or not? And that is comes with a lot of data and a lot of effort being put into whatever that is. So I do again, and there's a middle ground in there. Whether you want to go down that, I do think it's another like almost ancillary path to what we came in here to discuss, but not something that should be ignored.
So Dustin, I appreciate you bringing that up, and to that point, and not to scoop Director Van der Linden, but he's starting to put together an AI task force working group in the Gaming Commission that would help, I think, identify some of those snowflakes, kind of what you're talking about there, as far as what would be harmful to one versus the other, and matching that up with data. But we are very, very just in the beginning stages, right, Director Van der Linden, and I'm thinking about that. But it's something that we definitely want to be a thought leader on, because what's come up here multiple times today is oftentimes in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, when we don't know something, we're very curious and not judgmental, and we try to figure it out, right? We don't accept, well, this is how every other jurisdiction in the country does this. We see the license as a peerless privilege and to operate here. So I appreciate that. Anything to add there before we move on? All right. So we had a prompt that I found interesting. Let me make sure that I'm not skipping a prompt. Try to do this in real time. About the impacts to the industry if we allow limits on individual patrons. If we prohibit that or limit it by any law or regulation, and I'm happy to kick that over to our resident expert, Mr. Black, to kind of, if he would like to comment on that.
Yeah, just from that perspective, obviously, if limiting is no longer possible, right, for individual players to whatever extent, right, then there are, applicable restrictions, right? There'll be product restrictions that'd be necessary and that would impact all players, right? So they would be things like more defensive pricing strategies, meaning worse prices presented to patrons, lower limits, right, would be applied to all patrons, and obviously there'd be product restrictions and maybe even some offerings being removed, right? So if the ability not to limit, certain patrons and then everyone is painted with the same brush will obviously have an impact, right, on the offerings that are available to patrons within Massachusetts.
Yeah, I think that's a real risk, and I think it's something that we did see in some of the written comments that will go up. That potentially it would have broader impacts on the industry at large. Commissioners, any comments, questions, Justin, on that? Okay. I will ask. I'll just take a moment and ask whether it's sports wagering or Brianne, and I think we talked about it earlier, but I want it on the record. No other jurisdiction is really doing that, right? They're not putting that hard limit on right now. Okay,
None that we've researched, Jared. We've compared our regs against other jurisdictions' regs, and this is very similar language, and no other jurisdiction is different than Massachusetts.
All right. So that was, by the way, Prop 5.
Mr. Chairman, just a follow-up question. Is anyone aware of a jurisdiction, not a jurisdiction, sorry, an operator, a sports book who does not limit any patron? Setting aside, any limitation that's imposed by a jurisdiction, which we understand there are none, but.
So I see Jack's hands up. I don't know if it's to this question. I'm sure you may have a comment. Jack, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I was actually raising my hand on the earlier comments, but I can answer this as well. Yes, there are sports books that don't limit, that post the max limit, and that max limit is the same for everyone. There are also exchanges that allow, basically an exchange couldn't limit if they tried, because they're just the middleman in a transaction between a market maker and a consumer. And that's actually one of the solutions to propose to Massachusetts is, if I were to come to your state, I can't bet at any of your sports books. They've already all limited me. I would be forced to play elsewhere. But there are plenty of other operators out there that take a low margin approach to the industry. They're willing to learn from sharp bets. They're willing to take all comers and basically offer a level playing field for everyone. Now, they don't offer as many bets as a Bally's would offer, or DraftKings or FanDuel, but they do offer a fundamentally fair playing field for all bettors. The reason they're not in your state, and this is not a criticism to anyone on this call, is your barriers to entry are very high, and your tax rate is very high, and your licensing fees are very high. And these are low margin providers. So I know there's, this isn't an impetus to change, but there is a solution for answering the problem for a lot of consumers, and that is bring on the operators that are willing to take all comers.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And just another moment to mention that, we operate and regulate and effectuate the law, right? We don't pass it or make it. Commissioner Hill used to, but other than that, the commission, we effectuate what's on the books. Dustin, I see you have your hands up.
Yeah, I'll agree with most of what Jack just said there, that the easiest fix is a legislative fix. I know that's not your remit, you can't do anything about that, but so much of sports betting regulation and legalization came about in ways that didn't always provide the best consumer experience. It was tied to casino licenses, or I live in Oregon where there's a monopoly via the lottery. This is not the way to get the best customer experience or to even solve this problem. He's right. The way to fix it would be to have a more open marketplace, fewer lower barriers to entry, and allow exchanges and market makers to come in. Is that a feasible way to fix this in your state or your Commonwealth and other places? Arguably not. And I don't see a path to that meaningfully happening. It would fix the problem, but can it happen? That's a legislative question that you guys can't answer. There's also another side of this, is that the product will change. Like Jack says, they have fewer markets. You look at the operators that currently serve Massachusetts, they have this huge menu of betting options that is arguably very appealing to the average bettor who wants to bet on anything under the sun. That's that there's that. If there's fewer limits, or an operator is forced to take all of those bets on it, or a maximum, I don't know what the number with the threshold would be, but if they have to do that, they probably have to scale back their offering as a result. Do they make more money on higher volume? Maybe. Do they take do they have to? They're not going to take the same bets, I think, is the problem. So I think you're messing with the ecosystem in a way that makes sense, in a way that could potentially harm operators the way they do business currently in the Commonwealth. Again, I'm not saying that's good or bad. I'm just saying that's something that would happen depending on the threshold of what you do. So it's a little bit of careful what you wish for. If you're going to, you say every operator has to take, a minimum bet, you're going to have fewer markets. The prices are going to become more efficient, all of that. It's, again, not to say that you shouldn't do that, but again, I think there's some middle ground between operators can do whatever they want and limit anybody they want for any reason, and you can get down whatever amount of money that you want at any point in time. There's some middle ground, I think. And is that algorithmic? Is it a set number? I'm not the one to answer that. That's, again, I think a question for you guys need to work out with operators. But I think there's some middle ground that you can have a better customer experience, be serving the customer of the Commonwealth, but also listening to the concerns of the operator. And again, I think that's why I'm coming in here, is I think there's some middle ground that can be had that hopefully works for everyone. That's not just a free for all on either side, either the bettors or the operator side.
So I appreciate that, Dustin. I'll take this opportunity to say that, we don't want to drive people into the illegal market, right? And back into the arms of the underground market. And that's something that we're always thinking about. And it was why we, worked really hard to get it up and going. That said, you've raised some valid points, and it's why we're happy to learn a little bit. I see Brianne has her hand up. I will ask commissioners if they have any follow-up on either what Jack or Dustin just shared before we turn to Brianne. Okay, going to turn to Brianne.
Thank you. Not to be the one objectioner here, but I get a little bit nervous when we talk about decreasing barrier to entry. And I wonder if that comes at a cost, right? I hear you about, opening it up, and those are books that might not limit folks. But I wonder if it would really achieve, to Commissioner Skinner's point at the outset about everyday patrons being limited. Unless that's standardized and the minimum expectation, I wonder if even those barriers are lowered, are you still in the same precarious position where people unknowingly are being limited and with no rationale behind it? If the goal is to really address this, I don't know if that's necessarily the path forward. And I appreciate that I might be the only one with that opinion here, but we've often heralded Massachusetts as having really stringent barriers to entry and priding themselves on that. And I'm not saying it's perfect, and I'm not saying that there aren't changes, but I'm just saying, I don't know if even if that were the solution here, you ultimately achieve the issue you're facing, which is patrons complaining that they're being limited with little to no communication. And our patrons who are in desperate need of being limited not being offered that.
So Brianne, I'm going to interject here too and say, as one commissioner, when this first got brought up, right, and it's been months in the making, by the way, months and weeks in the making, people have known this was coming. I thought a lot about the communications piece, and it's something we've kind of touched on, but I see as a potential interesting place for us to explore, which is, if I'm the patron, right, what do I know about how long I'm limited, why I'm limited, when I can not be limited anymore? Is this a lifetime limit, or is this something that will lift in 6 months, right? Or is it to a particular offering, or maybe not, right? Those were all the questions I started as someone. Again, this is a learning exercise. I've never been limited, right? So as someone who's never been limited before, trying to understand how that works. So Dustin, I'll kick it to you, but I'm happy for anybody to tease that out. And I see it as a potential first step of a conversation on at least let's let the patrons know what's going on. So I'm going to kick it to Dustin and then to Jack. Dustin?
Yeah, sorry. I'm not gonna. I think Bram brought up good points, and there's a ton of knock-on effects if you just say lower barriers to entry. You can't just do that either. It has to be like, again, I know it's not a regulatory fix, so it's out of the purview here, but like, yeah, you can't just lower the barrier to entry and then everybody can come in. You have to deal with the existing licenses who obviously paid a lot of money for their licenses. There's so many policy ramifications that I think come with like lowering the barrier to entry that it's almost to the point where it's hard for it to believe it's going to happen in the Commonwealth or a state where it's done that. But I was just positing that Jack was right, that this is like allowing operators who do that, who again, or exchanges, which are, I think they're only in New Jersey and I believe Iowa and maybe coming into Colorado right now. Those are the places. Again, that's how you solve the problem. Maybe there's a secondary type of license for that, because those are an entirely different experience. They're allowing for peer-to-peer wagering. They don't take a cut of necessarily of the wager, like or they're usually agnostic onto how the bet is settled, right? They're taking a commission on a bet. That's maybe how you solve it. Like you have a secondary tier. Again, is that definitely not something within the remit of your body, but it's something that a legislative fix would allow, and it like allows the industry to go on as it happens, but also still allows people to get solves the larger issue of having people limited, because then they can go to a place where they're not limited. They at least have an option where sometimes they don't. And again, go back to transparency. Again, I think that's the key here is what do patrons know? I don't know. Sometimes, again, I see somebody says an email, you've been limited, like that's it. Like, or like Jack says, they don't get anything. That like having some transparency. What are you limited on? How are you limited? You're probably not getting out of limited jail ever. I don't think that's a likely scenario, but just a little like transparency on maybe the how and the why. I think that is stuff that I think that an operator, arguably could and should be compelled to offer to somebody that they're limiting on these kind of things.
No, thank you on that, Dustin. I will again point out that we're operating. We're trying to solve for an issue that was brought to our attention under the current structure and schemes, and we appreciate that you appreciate that. And thank you for your comments on the communication piece, Jack.
Yeah, and this echoes some of what Dustin said, but there is definitely a disconnect when players are limited to why they were limited. And part of that goes back to why I came in so fierce earlier in this discussion, is because operators tend to deny that they limit people due to winning. And if operators would just admit that, or if they were to paint with a little more narrow of a brush and say, okay, sir, we understand you can beat us on these NBA player props. We're going to limit you on NBA player props. You're welcome to play at any other sport, and we'll take it on a 1-by-1 basis as to if you can beat that sport on us. That's how blackjack's handled. We had a little earlier discussion on card counting. Is I've been backed off many a blackjack game and told you're welcome to play any other game in the casino. Well, with sports betting is you beat them on one thing and you're limited on everything. Case in point, after I got limited, I was limited on the coin toss for the Super Bowl. I could only bet like $27 on the coin toss Super Bowl. Not that I wanted to bet it, but that just goes to show you that the limits are pervasive across the board. And it really creates a not so great experience for any bettor, especially if they're limited falsely for being a winning bettor, if they just got lucky over a stretch and find themselves limited, which happens a lot.
Jack, thank you for that input. And I want to say, Dustin mentioned earlier about our catalog. I would say that operators in other jurisdictions would say we're a little bit restricted, because Jack, you wouldn't have been able to place that bet even if you could here in Massachusetts, because we don't allow for the coin flip on the Super Bowl. So I also want to take just a second and say that our consumers are treated really, really well here in the Commonwealth. the sports wagering team with Bruce and Andrew and Crystal and the team that works for them goes through and works with patrons who have had issues, and they work with the operators. And so there's a really good line of communication already going on. We see this as an added benefit, anything that we can learn here today, but I just wanted to put that plug in that we have a really, really good team that's in place that deals with consumer issues every day. Just to stick to this issue, and I don't know if my fellow commissioners have the same thoughts or questions, or anyone else wants to, perhaps from a responsible gaming even perspective, I really want to see if there are any other thoughts on communication pieces and the fairness and equity of letting people know what's going on with their account. I see no one leaning in. I see Brianne leaning in and waiting for everyone else very patiently. Brianne?
I just want to offer up, and maybe much to many who are watching, cringe, but Senator Blumenthal recently wrote to operators. Well, I understand it may have not been about limiting winners. To your very point, Mr. Chairman, about what kind of communication is happening, what kind of data aggregation is being used for individuals who might be struggling, to direct them to things like self-exclusion and treatment. From an RG perspective, I'd be remiss to not bring this up, that not only are states like yourself having to talk about these issues, we do have some interest at the federal level trying to understand more of what is happening. So I don't think that this issue is just unique to the patrons that you're hearing from and that your team is attending to. I'm not sure it makes it better that you're all in this together, but I did want to offer that point up, that this is being discussed in many jurisdictions and at many levels of government.
We are aware of that, and Commissioner O'Brien and others have made sure that we have kept it on our agenda setting meetings and to stay on top of it. So thank you for that. So believe it or not, commissioners, we've worked through the prompts. So that and we've learned a lot, right? That leads me to say, any other questions we have before we kind of go into final thoughts? Okay, not seeing any. To our guests, anything that you would like to leave us with as we're thinking about these issues, understanding that nothing's going to come out of this today, right, as far as policy or reg goes, but anything to leave us with to think about. Jack.
Thank you. Just one comment that I wanted to make sure I got in is when I listened to the March 28th meeting, Commissioner Skinner coined a term that I think is very smart, and that's the term fundamental fairness. And I think a lot of what players feel in sports betting these days is that it's not fair for them. Now, they have to bet into -110. Of course it's not going to be fair. The house has the edge. This is gambling. However, there's a lot of them that feel that things don't cut both ways, and limiting is just an example of that. And if you're able to limit a sharp bettor, why are you able to raise the limits of a bad bettor? That doesn't seem fair. And I would invite the commission in how they go forward with what they found today to realize that fairness is not just how it's intended. I believe everyone on this call, everyone in this industry intends to be fair. That's why they're in regulated gaming. But it's how it's perceived. And I think there's a lot of perception out there of fairness that feels just not right to people. And I appreciate the commission giving audience to this and understanding more about this, because this goes a long way to the perception of fairness, the fundamental fairness to grow and foster in the industry. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Jack. Dustin, I see your hands up.
Yeah, again, thank you for having me on the panel, Mr. Chairman, and the commissioners. Two odd thoughts that I had before we wrapped up was I don't know if this needs a regulatory fix necessarily, but I think it's worth talking about in this discussion is that the sports books also do a lot of marketing of very large bets, which is very discordant, I think, with player limiting and things like that, because they're marketing the idea you can bet whatever you want. And I don't think that's necessarily right or fair. You'll see even Mr. Portnoy, for you're familiar with, from both ESPN Bet, Barstool Sportsbook, or not ESPN Bet, but Barstool Sportsbook, and now represents DraftKings, like can get down whatever amount of money he would like. He bets, I think he's posted $1 million bet slips in the past several months. Like that, again, I'm not saying they shouldn't be able to do that. I'm just saying there's like, it seems discordant to me, and I don't know what the fix is for it, but it's discordant to say, look, this guy over here can bet hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars if he wants, and they can market that as a selling point. And then over here, you have people who can bet $1. That just, again, goes to what Jack said, fundamental fairness. I understand Mr. Portnoy and others are not good bettors. They're betting because he has the means certainly to lose that much money, but it gives this idea that you can, like, if you can bet what you want, and that's not really a fair. I don't think that really fairly assesses what's going on in the marketplace right now. I will also be remiss if I said, I know Massachusetts and the Attorney General's office has taken action against fantasy parlay sites, but the same things that happen at regulated sportsbook happens around player limiting happens with almost no regulation. Daily fantasy parlay sites that offer, again, parlays against the house. I just think it's worth pointing out that, again, it's not going on anymore, I don't think, in Massachusetts, but they have now just peer-to-peer games. But that is something that goes on in the out in the market as well, is that this is like player limiting is happening, but it's totally unregulated. There's no discussion. There's not really even a discussion to be had about it. Again, just filling in your mind of like what's the overall environment for this discussion is that's part of it as well. I'd argue, again, doesn't affect you primarily, but does dovetail with what's happening in the larger industry. Is that, you know, the operators are going to limit people because it makes them more money, right? That's the bottom line. And it's like, obviously then up to you, what is the middle ground, if there is a middle ground, to provide the best customer experience and also allow your operators to succeed in the Commonwealth. And again, thanks for having me on today.
Thank you, Dustin. Thank you, Jack, for sharing that. Any other thoughts, final thoughts, and we're thinking through? Commissioners, would you like to share any final thoughts about today's roundtable or where we're going on this? Commissioner O'Brien?
They're really not final thoughts. They're more initial thoughts, because to me, this is day one, maybe day 2 or 3, as Commissioner Skinner pointed out, of this conversation, which to me, I think we're going to have to be more proactive in our conversations with this in terms of where do we want to go with the information that we've gleaned, that we're going to get some follow-up from. And it does dovetail into responsible gaming. It dovetails into marketing. All of that needs to be taken into consideration as we go forward. But for me, this venue is a roundtable, not a public meeting in that regard. So I'll hold any further comment other than to say I would fully expect to ask this to be a recurring discussion at our public meetings, because I think that we need to keep moving with this.
Thank you. And I meant final thoughts for today. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
I think we're really early on in this conversation, right? Commissioner Skinner, fundamental fairness. I now have it written on my notebook.
I think a lot of similar terminology has been kicked around today, and I think it's important that we keep that at the forefront, those concepts of our discussions. I want to thank the participants of this roundtable today. We did have a little bit of a discussion, and I appreciate your contribution, but I have to admit the discussion was not as meaningful as I had hoped it would be. And there's something quite not right about asking you to speak on behalf of our sports books here in Massachusetts. And so I hope that we can continue this discussion in whatever form or fashion the operators are comfortable with and that meet our obligations under the open meeting law. because I do think we have not scratched the surface. In order for us to even have future conversations among this body at a public meeting, there's a lot of information that we just don't have. And so I you know, on the one hand, I feel like this was not a good use of our time today, given that we didn't have our primary stakeholders part of the discussion. But I hope we can work to change that going forward, because we do need to move this needle in whichever way is appropriate according to this body. I think when someone mentioned, a couple of folks mentioned that the data is going to be important, and that's a good starting point, it seems, for me.
Thank you, Commissioner Skinner. Commissioner Hill, anything to add?
I would just add that first of all, thank you for everybody who participated today, and thank you for the information. But I share in Commissioner Skinner's, I think, frustration, and I'll go so far as to say anger that I have today for not being able to get a lot of more information that I thought we would be able to get today to start this conversation. And although it was started today, it really didn't give us the starting point that I had hoped that we would get today. The information we did get, it was invaluable, and we will take it forward as we start this discussion in public meetings for sure. But I feel like Commissioner Skinner that there was a lot more information we should have and could have gotten today that we didn't get. And it was very disappointing to me.
Thank you, Commissioner Hill. I guess that's a good segue to say I want to thank again, Mr. Black, for you attending today and for your contributions. I think they're invaluable, and Bally's Corporation for sending you and having this conversation. It's unfortunate that we may have missed some voices today that we expected to hear. That said, I want to thank everyone for attending. It's been enlightening. I actually think what we did here was exactly what I needed to hear from the voices that were here, right? And we hope to continue this conversation, as you just heard from my fellow commissioners. And we really hope to continue learning. We always are trying to, we want to be the best. We want to be the best regulators in the country, and we will never shy away from that, and nor should we. Regulating is a balancing act, right? And we strive to strike the proper balance. With that said, any business that was not anticipated or anything that commissioner updates, commissioners? Do we have a motion to adjourn this roundtable?
Move to adjourn, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner Hill.
Second.
Second, Commissioner O'Brien. All right, we'll do a roll call. Commissioner O'Brien.
Aye.
Commissioner Hill.
Aye.
Commissioner Skinner.
Aye.
And I vote yes. Thank you to everyone that participated again. Thank you for lending your voice, and have a great Tuesday.